Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are finally getting to some real biology now. So I hope you guys enjoy this. We're starting unit 2 on ecology. So let's get started with an introduction to what that means exactly. So first, ecology is a field of study within biology itself. So it's kind of like a subset of biology. It's part of it. And it's defined as the study of relationships between living organisms and their environment. It comes from two Greek words, oikos meaning house and logos meaning study. So you are studying your house. It's mainly evolved into something that's really focused on how we interact with other organisms and how we interact with our environment. It includes some topics that maybe you've heard of before, like symbiosis, nutrient cycling, biomes, ecosystems, habitats, and so much more. It's fairly a new field of biology as well. It was only introduced in 1866 by a German biologist, so it is one of the newer fields of biology. Now, when you're doing ecology research, you're often doing field work. You're often observing animals and how they're interacting, but you also do models. If I'm trying to see how a population of animals interacts with all the other populations in a huge habitat, it's really hard to get information just from doing field work and observation. I'm often going to have to build a model. So models are used, remember, because the experiment is too dangerous, too hard, or impossible to do, or it's unethical. So if we want to see what adding a predator into a population would do, we can't exactly do that if it's going to destroy the environment. So we'll want to model it instead. So those are often really popular when it comes to ecology research. Now, all life, as you guys learned, is one of the characteristics of living things, is organized. We are organized into cells and organ systems, but the world itself also has levels of organization. The first one is called the organism or individual level. And this is one individual living thing, like you, or one bird, or one tree, something like that. It's the lowest level of organization before you get inside the body. So it's the smallest that you can get and be a whole living organism. So if you see the pictures on the right, you have a fern, you have a mushroom, you have a frog, you have bacteria. These are all one organism. The next level up is called the population level. So this is where individual organisms of the same species share the same area. So it would be like the group of giraffe that you see in the picture. It would be like the human population in California. It would be like all the fish in a pond of the same species. Things like that. So it's the same species of animals living in the same area. So it wouldn't necessarily include the entire world unless that's what you were looking at. You can do a population study of the entire world's population of that organism, like humans. But often it's limited to a specific area. They don't normally do them on such a large scale, their research in populations. So we're moving up in organization, so things are getting more complex as we keep going. And this next level is called a community. It's a group of populations, so different species, different populations of different species interacting in the same area at the same time. So if you look at our picture here, you'll have some tangs and some other species of fish. I'm not very good with fish, so I don't know all their names, but you have all these different species of fish here that are interacting. But you also have a sea urchin right here. You also have all these different coral types that are all living things. Those are all different populations interacting in the same area at the same time, so they form a community. Now, the water and the oxygen in the water and the actual hard parts of the coral and the sand, those are not part of the community. It's only the living populations. We're not talking about anything that's not living. So another example would be like a pack of wolves in a forest. You're going to have the wolves, you're going to have the trees, you're going to have the grass, you're going to have all the insects. All of those are going to be interacting at the same time in the same place. You can have a school of fish surrounded by some sharks, which have a remora on them, and they're surrounded by plankton in the water, and they're all going to be interacting in the same place at the same time, these populations. The next higher level is called an ecosystem. So how I said that communities are only the living factors, the living organisms there, an ecosystem starts to include the non-living things, what we call its abiotic factors. I'm going to go over that term in a little bit. So an ecosystem is just a biological community and all of its non-living or abiotic factors that are affecting it. So now we're talking about the deer and the raccoons and the fish and the bugs and the insects and the birds in this area and all the plants. And how do they interact with the water that's available to them, with the temperature, with the amount of sunlight, the climate, all of these things? That is what we're talking about at the ecosystem level. How are we interacting with all the living and non-living things around us in the specific area at a specific time? The next highest level is called a biome. So this is a large group of similar ecosystems. They're going to share the same climate, have the same types of communities in there, so they'll have the same types of populations. So in this case, you can see in the picture you have something like a desert biome or an Antarctic biome with the penguins. You can have the savanna here. You can have a mountain. You can have a forest. Those are all different types of biomes. And we're going to go over those more in detail later. The highest level of organization on Earth for life is the biosphere. It's all of the biomes on Earth combined. Another definition for the biosphere is the portion of the planet that supports life. It's often only used to discuss the living things, not the non-living things. We use other terms like the hydrosphere and the geosphere to talk about the non-living portions. So the biosphere is all the life on Earth. So going over them from the bottom up, you start at organism, I'm sorry, that's the lowest. Then you move to population, then community, ecosystem, then you're missing biome here in between. And finally, you have the biosphere. And if you notice, each level focuses on a different process. So at the organism level, we're looking at survival. How does the organism survive? How does it reproduce? How is it being affected by natural selection? For the population level, we're looking at how is the population surviving? Is it growing? Is it dying? Is it migrating? What's going on there? For the community level, you're looking at interactions among populations. So how does this population of animals compare to this other one? And do they prey on each other? Are they like predator-prey? Or do they live together in harmony? All of these things are what we're looking at. For the ecosystem, we're looking at how does the energy move through the ecosystem? How do we cycle nutrients like carbon and nitrogen that everything needs to live? And then at the biosphere level, you're obviously looking at everything on a global scale. So to review, the ecology is the study of how organisms interact with each other and the environment. And all life is organized, even on the planet scale. So how is the life on the planet organized? Remember, that's one of our characteristics of life. So we start with the individual or the organism, and then we move to the population, which is the group of the same species, a community, which is all the living populations interacting in the same place at the same time, the ecosystem, which is all of the communities and how they interact with the non-living things, the biome, which is just a similar group of ecosystems with the same climate and the same communities, and then finally the biosphere is putting it all together. So in your notes, answer these questions. You can pause the video before you move on. What do ecologists study? What do you think they're actually studying? Which level of organization is the lowest? Which is the largest? Try not to look back in your notes for that one. Try to see if you can remember it. And which characteristic of life is shown by creating these levels? So the fact that we have these levels, what is that showing? What characteristic of life? When you're all done, you can press play and keep going with the video. So I mentioned the term abiotic earlier. You have biotic and abiotic factors that exist in the world. The biotic factors are the living factors. Remember, bio means life. So these are things like the birds and the plants and all the other animals. It could also be things that these living things are doing with each other. Are they predating on each other? Are they migrating? Are they in some kind of symbiosis that we'll talk about later? The other term is an abiotic factor. To put the letter A in front of a term means to say it's not or against. So not or against bio, life. This is not life. It's non-living factors. Things like what's in the soil? How much water do they have? What's the condition of the water? Is it healthy, or is there a lot of dissolved oxygen for fish and things like that? What's their climate and their weather like? What's their sun availability around the year? Things like that. Now, where would you think a dead thing would fall? Is it a biotic factor or an abiotic factor? And why do you think that is? We're going to go over this one in class next time, but make sure you write down your answer in your notes so that way you can compare the real answer to what you thought at first. Really think that one through. Now, all living things have a habitat and a niche. So a habitat is an area where an organism lives. It's like its natural environment. A niche, on the other hand, is the organism's role or its job in the environment. So all of this has to do with survival. An organism needs to find shelter, food, water. It needs to reproduce in order to survive, in order for its species to survive as well. So the habitat is more like where the organism finds all of these things to meet its needs. The niche is more how it fills its needs. How does it eat versus where is it getting its food from? Something like that. So habitats can vary in size. It can be one tree, it can be the area under a rock, or it could be hundreds and hundreds of square miles if you're a migrating animal. It could be like the monarch and travel between different countries. It could be like some migrating birds that cross the ocean. So a habitat can be many sizes, many shapes, and made up of many different things. It contains all of the biotic and abiotic factors that the organism needs in order to survive. So something like an anemone for a clownfish, that's its habitat in the ocean. Or a koala, its habitat is in a eucalyptus tree. They don't really come down from the trees very often. And that's where it finds its food. It's where it finds its shelter. It mates in there. It raises its young, things like that. The niche is a way for organisms to not compete with each other. You don't want to be fighting over your food and your water all the time. I know your siblings probably are like, ooh, I want your fries. Let me go grab them and take some off your plate. Well, imagine if that was the only food you were getting unless you fought and killed for your other food. You would be like, hey, I won those fries. Those are mine. You can't take them from me. So in order for things to not compete over the same resources, they kind of have a different role or a different job in the ecosystem. So like bees, they are pollinators. They get food from flowers. They get the nectar, but they also serve a purpose in doing what they do. As they go get their food, they pollinate plants, and they fit a very specific need for the environment, and they fit a need for themselves. Now, bees won't be getting nectar from the same flowers as a hummingbird or even a butterfly sometimes. They're all attracted to different types of flowers. That's what we're talking about with a niche preventing competition. They find such a very specific place that they're needed in the world that works for them, that they've adapted to, and they create a way of life for themselves, and their species can continue. Now, because habitats can overlap, because some organisms have similar niches, and because organisms often use other organisms for habitats, like a squirrel lives in a tree, organisms are often forced to interact with each other. And this is really where ecology works. Ecology, like I said, is all about the interactions. What is one species doing with another? How does this one species interact with its environment? So it's okay that things are competing and interacting. This is what we're trying to study. So ecological interactions, some of them could be competition. It could be predator-prey relationships, or it could be something called symbiosis that we'll talk about in a second. So let's look at each of these one by one. First, competition. This is when one or more organism uses the same resource at the same time. So a resource can be like a water hole. It can be light if you're a plant and you're in the forest. I'm going to be competing with you for light. It's all of the things that are essential for life. That's what our resources are. And everything is always competing for them because there's a limited amount. There's a limited amount of space. There's a limited amount of water, of light, of shelter, of food. So we all have to compete in the end. Now, competition in the wild usually ends with one organism winning and the other organism losing, often to the point of death. If you are not fit and you can't adapt to your environment, you are going to die because you're not getting your needs met. You're not getting your food, your water, your shelter. So you won't be able to survive. So when we're talking about competition, the more available resources, the less competition. If I have tons of space, I'm not going to really be bothered by you. But if space is very limited, we might get into a few more fights like, hey, you're sitting on my chair, move away, things like that. There's two different types of competition: intra-specific and inter-specific competition. The first one, intraspecific, is competition between organisms of the same species. So two males of the same species competing over a female, or two birds trying to nest in the same place. They're going to fight. I have a hummingbird feeder in my backyard, and they're always competing over who has control of the feeder. I have this one that he kind of perches out and chases off all the others all day long. So they're competing over that resource of food. But they're all the same species. They're all hummingbirds. Now, interspecific competition is competition between organisms of different species. So an example that I put on the slide here, lions and hyenas, they will often compete over the same food source. So they're going to end up sometimes getting into fights with each other because they're trying to eat the same thing. Another example with my hummingbird feeder could be sometimes a bright yellow oriole will come and land on the feeder and actually drink the nectar. So this is a different species competing with my hummingbird for the nectars now. So it's not competition between the same species, it's competition between different species. The next type of interaction is called predation. Now, this is one you guys are probably very familiar with. It's pursuing and consuming another organism for food. You have the predators that do the eating and the prey that gets eaten. These are really going to affect population ecology, so at the population level of organization. How large is my population of prey before a new predator moves into town? What happens if my predator population becomes too big? These are all things that ecologists try to study. So some examples of predator-prey: you have a cat eating a mouse, you have a spider eating a mosquito, or a bat eating a mosquito. In the pictures, you have the bear eating the salmon. You have a praying mantis eating some type of other insect. So it's where you get your energy by eating something else. The last type of interaction is called symbiosis. This is probably a new term for you guys. All it means is a close relationship that exists when two or more species live together and attempt to survive. So and when we're saying live together, often it means on top of each other or in very, very close proximity or even inside of you. So symbiosis is not the same as we're occupying the same habitat area. This is more, I am living on and in your body. There's 3 types: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. The first one, mutualism, think of when you say to somebody, oh yeah, the feeling's mutual. You both feel the same feeling. So in this case, this is a symbiotic relationship where all organisms benefit. Both get a positive gain. They're both getting something out of it. So they often provide food for each other or shelter. Those are some common ones. They'll often help by removing parasites from each other. So an example would be this cleaner shrimp right here on the moray eel. The cleaner shrimp actually goes to many different animals in the ocean and will go inside its mouth and clean off really bad parasites and bugs. It'll clean its skin and all of that to keep the animal healthy. And the cleaner shrimp gets a meal out of it. So it gets to eat, and the moray eel gets to be clean and healthy. So the moray eel doesn't want to eat the shrimp because then it would chase all the shrimp off and not get that benefit. So they've learned to live together in a mutualistic relationship. Another example is the plover bird. They are often seen on animals in the savannah. They will sit on the buffalo or on antelope, and they will actually eat parasites off of the mammal. So it's very similar to the cleaner shrimp. Another example that you see in this picture on the bottom. Often when you have large animals like elephants or cows or buffalo, as they walk through the grass, they will walk so heavy that it brings bugs up out of the soil and out of the grass. And so birds will follow along behind them, and they benefit by that disturbance of the ground, and they eat all the bugs. Now the elephant doesn't care. It's going to walk whether it wants to or not, whether the birds are there or not, but the bird benefits from the elephant being there. The last type of interaction is called parasitism. So this is what we're talking about when we say you have a parasite. It's a relationship where one organism benefits because it's harming the other organism. So it can be an internal parasite like a heartworm that your dog can get or a tapeworm in your stomach. Or it can be an external parasite like a flea or a tick or a mosquito. Ugh. So another example is a cuckoo bird. This will actually, they will lay their egg in the nest of a different species of bird. And the cuckoo bird will hatch, and it will grow much faster than the other type of bird. And it will actually steal all the food from the other babies and either starve them, or it will even push the babies out of the nest until it's the only bird left. And this other species is taking care of it. So it's a parasite. It's living with this other species of bird and taking advantage of it and harming their babies and killing the babies in order to live. There's another one, the tongue-eating louse. I didn't want to put a picture because it's really gross, but you can Google it if you want. There's a bug that will eat away the tongue of a fish and then pretend to be its tongue. So it's benefiting because as the fish is eating, it gets to have some of that food too. But the fish is actually being harmed because now it's going to have a hard time eating with that bug in its mouth. It's getting its food taken away and it lost its tongue. So kind of gross. All right, so summarizing all of this, ecology is the study of how organisms interact with each other and the environment. The world is organized into different levels. You have individual, then population, community, ecosystem, biome, and biosphere. That goes from the simplest to the most complicated. The living components of an ecosystem are called the biotic factors. The non-living components are the abiotic factors. All organisms must have a habitat and a niche. The habitat is the place that they occupy where they get their needs met. The niche is the role or job that the organism fulfills to help it get its needs met. Interactions are the key to ecology. So the main interactions are competition, and there's two types: intraspecific between the same species and interspecific between two different species. You have predation, where a predator will eat its prey, and you have symbiosis, mutualism, where both are benefited, commensalism, where one is benefited and the other is neutral, and parasitism, where one is benefiting by hurting the other. So write down any questions that you guys may have had or something that you don't understand that you want me to go over in class, and we will do that. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you soon.